With the delayed launch of Nvidia's RTX 3070 to October 29th, that comes just one day after AMD is announcing RDNA 2 or Big Navi GPUs, which are going to be highly competitive. So let's talk about this massive GPU battle that's about to happen. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Consider subscribing, hit that notification bell. We do a lot of analysis of GPUs and CPUs, PC hardware that's coming out, as well as really awesome PC builds, water-cooled, air-cooled. Alright, so let's get right into the important points with the Nvidia delay of the 3070 and as it pertains to AMD. Now, previously we spoke about other reasons such as stock and Nvidia making sure it's a better, less frustrating customer experience in order to make the RTX 3070 launch go a lot smoother than the RTX 3080 launch. But first, I think the number one reason why this is very important, and that's going to have to do with AMD. It just happens that on October 28th, AMD is going to be announcing their RDNA 2, their new GPUs, as we call them, Big Navi, potentially a 6900 XT, 6800 XT, and a 6700 XT. Now, why is this important? For the first time, it seems like AMD is actually trying to compete with Nvidia on the higher end. Last generation, they kind of stopped at the 5700 XT, which was a little bit below the 2070 Super, so Nvidia really had no competition at that 2080 level and above. So now that AMD is really looking to compete with Nvidia sort of in that mid-tier to the high end now, Nvidia certainly has a lot better reason to take very careful steps with their launch of the 3070, which, let's face it, at $499 and them boasting that it has better performance or at least equal to a 2080 Ti, you know that the demand is going to be ridiculously high. If people are overpaying for 3080s and 3090s, imagine a 3070. That GPU really hits the sweet spot of that price to performance ratio, so the demand is going to be insanely high, and I think that's one of the primary reasons, aside from stock issues, that Nvidia really wants to make sure this goes well, because I think the main battleground for this GPU battle is going to be around that 3070 and with whatever AMD comes out with. So I think it's pretty smart what Nvidia is doing. They're accepting responsibility for the launch of the RTX 3080. Could have gone smoother, giving them time to not only work on different launch issues like the website availability, ramping up stock, but it also keeps this launch a little bit after AMD's announcement, because imagine this scenario. Imagine on October 15th, the same thing happens to the 3070, which pretty much we can assume was going to happen just because the 3080 and the 3090 launch, which was a week after, really wasn't any better at all. Websites were still crashing, there were still bots, and people still couldn't get their hands on even the more limited 3090. So you can expect that the 3070's October 15th launch was most likely going to be troubled by the same issues. Even having more countermeasures in place with website having more stock, the demand for the 3070 could be appreciably higher, because first of all, it's a little bit more of a cheaper GPU, meaning more people can afford it, and people are a little bit frustrated they couldn't get their hands on a 3080 or 3090. So the next step would be to try and snag one of these 3070s on launch day. At least at $499, you're at least getting something that the price to performance ratio is good, unlike a 3080, which is going for maybe over $1,000 with scalpers and things of that nature if you're trying to get a GPU right now. So imagining that scenario of sort of another botched launch on October 15th, then that may turn a lot of people off to Nvidia because they're going to be frustrated with the launches. So what's the next thing they're going to be hyped about? Of course, AMD's RDNA 2 on October 28th. That's going to shift the momentum towards AMD. And this is actually a very important point, because look what happened between Intel and AMD. For years, AMD wasn't even in the running. Intel was dominating, but little by little, because of Intel's complacency in the market and AMD producing fantastic Ryzen CPUs, they were able to not only enter a bigger market share, but also enter sort of the hearts and minds of the gamers and enthusiasts to the level that they became sort of like the sweet darling of the PC enthusiast community just because of the value for performance that they were putting out. So while Nvidia doesn't necessarily have to worry about value to performance against AMD for the most part, because Nvidia is different than Intel, they certainly have amazing products, they're performing well. The bigger issue here is really the frustrating launches. They do have to worry about that, because if it happened again with the 3070, and I'm sure they're well aware of this, people would start looking at the AMD launch, and if AMD could somehow deliver on at least having more GPUs available at launch, they can certainly win a lot of people over from Nvidia who simply cannot get a GPU. Even if somebody preferred a 3070 or 3080 to maybe like an RDNA 2 6800 XT, if they can't get the 3080, they're going to go for whatever they can get first, or whatever seems to be available first, and their mindset may completely change, where now they're waiting for the AMD card. And even as Nvidia stocks 3070s and 3080s, maybe in their gamer hearts and their enthusiast hearts, they were so frustrated by the launches that now they have more of a sweet spot for AMD and are willing to give AMD a little bit more of a chance, much like they did with AMD versus Intel. So this is definitely something that I think Nvidia is very keen on, because they don't want to lose any market share at all. They want to be the dominant player. They certainly have had the dominant products that really do perform well for the dollar of this generation, the 3000 series generation, at least on paper. Now they just have to get these GPUs out to the hands of gamers to make sure that they stay with that competitive edge over AMD. So I think that's a primary reason they moved it after the AMD launch. At least then people aren't hyped up now about the AMD launch, and it's the day after. So there are going to be a lot of people thinking now, all right, the RTX 3070 is launching the day after RDNA 2. RDNA 2 looks pretty good, looks pretty competitive, but Nvidia probably delayed the launch for a reason, and they told us that reason primarily was to ensure that there's better stock. So that means they're going to have a better chance at getting an RTX 3070. So that means the entire month of October, AMD is not going to be their sweet spot, their sweet darling, something that they're looking forward to. Nvidia's 3070 in the hearts of many of these gamers, especially since it's been so rare and scarce with the 3080, they're still going to have their sights set on that 3070. So when that time comes and they still can't get a 3070, maybe in November, things will change depending on how good these new AMD GPUs are. But at least I think this is a very smart move by Nvidia, because it keeps the 3070 relevant and it doesn't put a very troublesome launch before AMD announces their GPUs and completely sort of shifts over the attention towards AMD. So this is why I think this is actually a very smart move on their part, not only to ensure they have more stock and it does go a little bit less frustratingly unawesome, if we can use that word, but they maintain that marketing and competitive edge versus AMD. And this is actually very important. You see all the hype, all the marketing. These companies try to build trust with the consumer. So they want to make sure that trust is built, or else that consumer will go to the other side. As with what happened with AMD versus Intel, as we mentioned before, people lost trust in Intel because they thought Intel was going to be expensive with higher prices without really innovating and just giving them very iterative updates every year without really having anything revolutionary. AMD gave them good prices and really nicely performing multi-threaded core CPUs, therefore slowly gaining the trust of gamers to the point where we are now. So that's something on the horizon for GPUs as well, and I think that's AMD's plan for the GPU. They want to win the hearts of gamers just like they did against Intel, and certainly Nvidia recognizes this, and that's why they're sort of playing chess right now against AMD, because remember, even independent of AMD releasing these GPUs in the market, Nvidia still is dealing with massive demand and manufacturing ramping up and different things of that nature. They're battling against themselves now, which is actually a positive because they're selling more GPUs. That means that demand is really out there. And then sort of that second battle, when they win the battle with stock, is going to be the battle against AMD. And then a quick note on these AMD GPUs coming up. Of course, we don't know too much information yet, but there have been a couple of leaks. We do know they're going to be competing on the higher end. One of the interesting cards, possibly the 6900 XT, may have as much as 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, this may be significant because the 3080 only has 10 gigabytes of VRAM. So if this GPU is competing with the 3080, and if they can somehow price it in a very competitive manner and at least have stock of it, that's definitely going to be key. I could see how actually a lot of people would shift right over to that sort of GPU, because a lot of people feel like 10 gigabytes of VRAM, maybe in 4K, it's not as future-proof. Maybe in the future future you may have issues. That's why there's a supposed 20 gigabyte 3080 coming out, and I think most likely Nvidia will launch that sometime after the AMD launch is really available sort of in stock and in people's hands. That way, it'll keep people from jumping over to the 6900 XT because it has more VRAM, and it'll keep more people inside the Nvidia ecosystem, but that's going to depend on price as well. Therefore, they're going to have to push these better performing products in order to make sure they stay competitive with AMD. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and just this analysis of the current market situation. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell. We do a lot of videos like this, analysis of the market of hardware. We do PC hardware reviews and water-cooled computers, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.